Hi, this is Yvette Portermore, and I have Augie Bareno, and he's here today to talk to me about Logan Heights area and his experience, and I have permission to record him. All right.
Thank you, thank you. Well, let me start at the beginning. My family's fortunate in that we have two anthropologists, academicians that have recorded the journey of my family to Logan Heights. And then we have a cousin who's an academician in the University Autonomous of Baja California in La Paz, who documented the Barenos that stayed in Baja. And then Dr. Robert Alvarez at UCSD, the anthropologist, he's my cousin. So he traced our family leaving Loreto, Baja California in 1900s to Logan. So we have a record of their journey and how they became part of San Diego. But the first ones came in 1900. They were, my grandmother is a Mesa Smith. They were Smiths, but in Baja you say Smith, not Smith, Smith. And they came to, the first ones came in 1900. They came to El Cajon. They worked there on ranches, and then from that family, it produced a cousin of my dad, Manuelito Smith. Manuelito Smith became the first modern era policeman on the San Diego Police Department in 1938. And from that, the Smith side, the others followed in 1920. They left from Loreto, Baja California. They went to Guaymas, they went to Mexicali, they went to Calexico, then Lemon Grove, and then Logan Heights. So they all followed that similar path based on really just looking for work, trying to provide for their families, and that was a kind of a character throughout the history of our family, because my grandmother's family, she was like 11 sisters, and they were descendants of James McClish Smith, who was the first European to settle and marry in Baja California, and I believe 1860. But all the sisters, they grew up together. Then their parents died, and they were given to the church in Loreto, and then they passed all the girls out to either relatives, friends, or people with money. But the sisters, they had grown so close to each other that they didn't let the separation diminish their sisterhood, their bond. So they all stayed very close. And so when one sister came, the first group, to 1900, to the rest of them, and my grandmother and her three sisters, they all came at the same time. So that bond that they had as little girls, it carried with them all the way through, to Calexico, to Guaymas, to Lemon Grove, to Logan Heights. And they all ultimately had their families kind of live together and near each other. And so I'm fortunate to have that, because Dr. Robert Alvarez, he documented that and he published it in his book. And then our other cousin, his last name is Vargas. He documented the history of the Barenos from the first two brothers that came from Vizcaya, Spain, to La Paz and then Loreto. And then they had a cousin with them who didn't like it, and he kept going. He left La Paz and went south to Venezuela, and then he ultimately wound up creating a branch of Barenos in Aruba. And then those from Aruba, some of them moved back to the Netherlands. And so, so there's Barenos over there that started from the original ones that came to Bar. And so I try to, because they speak a language called Papamiento, which is it's a mixture of Taino, which is the native, and Spanish and Dutch. So it's like a cool language, and I look at them because I met a couple of them in Miami, and you look at them like, hey, that's my cousin from Tijuana. You know he speaks Spanish, motherfucker. You know they don't. They speak Papamiento, and they're very almost European. They're because Aruba belonged to the Netherlands, so the Dutch influence is really strong there. But, so all of that's documented, which a majority of people don't have that. I mean, you have it coming north, but we're fortunate to have it being looked at from the beginning, and then the cousin in La Paz, he followed the branches where the ones that stayed in Mexico, but also the ones that came to the United States, and there was a lot of them. And then we had some from the Aruban branch that wound up in Vancouver and in Canada and in Winnipeg. They're over there, but they're originally from that branch. But they're all Barenos, and they have acknowledged because they have some academicians in Aruba that have acknowledged in a book. It's written in Dutch, but that acknowledges the nexus between the original three brothers and cousins that came from Vizcaya, Spain, to La Paz, and that one cousin was the one that kept going. And so they have chronicled him, and then they've chronicled the ones that were in Aruba, and then there was one in Aruba that in the Depression years created a Harry's Bakery or some shit in Aruba, and that family created a bunch of people that have restaurants, and a lot of those are in Canada, but they're Caribbean food from that Harry's Bakery. So it's interesting how people, follow a common path, and it's a funny thing, like the bond that my grandmother and her sisters and her one brother, which is my dad's uncle, Mateo Ligorio, you pick up their characteristics, and then over time you see that mannerism or that sense in somebody else, and then you wonder, what is that? Well, that comes from the original sisters, and we would do things like, my dad was very conscious of his aunts, and we would go with him to visit them. He'd go see if they're okay, blah blah blah. And then as we got older, we had like my mother's mother, she lived on Newton by Memorial, and the freeway took her house, and she came and she was living with us. And then one of my aunts had a daughter in World War II and didn't marry the guy, and the guy was a white guy from Norway or some shit. But my aunt gave my cousin away to a family in I think Watsonville or somewhere up in the agricultural area. And my mother and my grandmother found out, so they got a lawyer in I think Fresno or somewhere, because Watsonville back then was like a little chicken shit town. So they got a lawyer in the closest big city, and they went to the family that had my cousin, and they said, no, you know, that's our blood. So they took my cousin back, and she lived with my grandmother on Newton. She went to Logan and Memorial, and you know, but.
So she was very young then.
Yeah, she was a child. She was an infant.
Oh yeah.
But so they brought her back, but when the freeway came in and took my grandmother's house, it was just assumed that my grandmother would live with us, so she did. She came and we lived, at the time we lived on Z Street, right there by St. Jude's. My dad built all of those houses. In fact, he built the house that Aubrey Faye lived in. Yeah, it's like.
And it's still there, or did it get taken?
It got torn down, but it's been, Aubrey's house has been redone.
Okay.
But some of the houses my dad built are still there.
Oh, wonderful.
And my mother was the draftsman. She drew the plans, you know. But anyway, so my grandmother came to live with us, and at that time, my cousin Vicky was just starting at Lincoln, and she mentioned, and my grandmother was real close to her, because that, you know, that was her last grandchild, because she was getting up there in age. So my cousin said something to my grandmother about, you know, well, I'd like to have my own place one day. And so all of a sudden my grandmother, you know, was pushing my mother to find her a place. And my mother goes, why? You're fine here. You know, I take care of you. No, well, Vicky wants her. That was my cousin. She wants her own place, and she can have her friends over and all that. Because in our house on Z Street, there was like 29 of us, and we had. So they moved, and they find her a place. You know where Jerry's Market is on 45th? She lived down the middle of the block, behind my uncle. My uncle worked at the city water department. And he had a little, they're not shacks, but they're little places. And my grandmother and my cousin rented one. And my cousin would always have, I don't know if you ever remember Dindy Alonso. Well, anyway, Dindy was like a real party girl, but she lived next, Dindy and Ricky Alonso, they lived next door to my grandmother's little thing. And so they would have, they'd be, because my grandmother, when I think they got to California from New Mexico in 1919, but my grandfather got into a restaurant downtown on 5th called the Spanish Cafe, and he was partnering with some woman. And suffice it to say, my grandfather liked bitches, so eventually he hooked up with the lady, and he divorced my grandmother. But my grandmother had come from Zacatecas, Mexico, where they were real, the church was very, very, very prominent in her life. And according to her, she was from money, and my grandfather was a tramp, and you know. But when they got divorced, my grandmother went to Guadalupe Church to talk to the priest to tell him, hey, tell my husband to knock it off. And the priest was like, because she came from a time and a place where they really believed that the church was omnipotent, they could do anything. And then she gets over here, and the priest of Guadalupe told her, you know. So she waited and waited, and my my grandfather never, changed his ways. And so one day she goes to the parsonage where the priest was, Guadalupe. And she knocks on the door. He comes out. What can I do for you? Well, my husband never changed. He's gone. And the priest was like, well, basically he told her, what do you want me to do? So, I mean, he did it wrong, but my grandmother goes, well, nothing really, but she took off her wedding ring. She goes, here's his ring, and here's the key to your church. I don't want to belong. And she got involved. And this was like in the Depression years. So she got involved with the creation of a lot of the Mexican Protestant churches in Logan. In fact, she was one of the founders of the Free Methodist Church right there on Irving.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But after that, after the Catholic Church,
well, I think that's why we became Methodist.
She was like,
my mom was Catholic, and then Episcopalian, and then Methodist.
Episcopalian is real close too.
Yeah.
To the ceremonial.
Yeah.
But anyway, my grandmother goes, here, I don't want the ring, and I don't want your religion. Because it was counter to how she grew up and believed.
Yeah. But the church didn't stick up for her.
Well, no,
help her like
she wanted the church to at least scold him.
Yeah.
But by then he was like, and then he remarried. And I remember I was having like my 5th birthday, and I was the youngest grandchild, so my grandfather really doted on me. And I had my party I was turning 5 years old, and back then Hopalong Cassidy was a big deal on TV. So my grandfather got me a Hopalong Cassidy hat, cowboy hat, for my party. But he couldn't come, even though he paid for the party and everything, because my grandmother was there. So back then, if you were divorced, you can't be in the same place. So my grandmother told my mom that if that fucker's there, I'm not coming. So my mom had to tell my grandfather, but he paid for the party. He got me all, but he couldn't come. And then he dies right after that, about a month or 2 after that he died. And it was like till the end. She did not give a shit. So, but anyway, it was that the bond of helping each other. Like my mom was from New Mexico. She taught us.
What part of New Mexico?
Silver City.
Okay.
They came in 1919. And my grandparents were both from Zacatecas. In a place called Jerez. I've never been there. But anyway, and we saw it with my mom, because my grandfather remarried and he had another family, and my mom had stepsisters and brothers, and they would come and see my mom, and my mom would be, of her brothers and sisters, which were 7, she was the only one that talked to them, because we thought, how come nobody else? How come they don't go to nobody else? Why they always come to our house? And it was like, then my mom used to say, you know what? She says, people are people. It wasn't their marriage, it was your grandmother and your grandfather. They didn't do anything. So they deserve, at least basic decency. And then she would do that with neighbors or people that she met, or what they used to have for the Little League at Memorial. They'd always have a spaghetti dinner, And my mom and there was a group of women that did all the cooking, so when they would have the spaghetti dinner, my mom would take the leftovers and she'd drop them off with so-and-so from the school or so-and-so from this or from that, from the cannery. Like they were always looking out for people, but that's how they grew up. You know, they took care of each other. And, you know, you just do it because it's the right thing to do. And that was that same bond of my grandmother on my dad's side and all of them people that came from Baja. They still looked out for each other. They was like, you know, or if you know, if one found out about jobs, they'd tell another cousin or a relative. They would do it mostly for people from Baja because they knew them. You know what I'm saying? They knew cousins, so somebody tell so-and-so that, hey, this guy over at Lemon Grove's hiring people, you know. But if it was done regionally. They did it, and then my mom the same way. They were partial to people from New Mexico. They helped each other out, but it was it's like a silent element, like, you know. Or she'd go with Aubrey's mother, Mrs. Fay, Mr. Fay, he would get drunk sometimes and thump her. And my mom would go, you know, go over and find out if what's her name, Marjorie. You guys go over and see if Marjorie's okay, if she needs anything. And it would always follow, you know, when something happened. But just, you know, just go see if she needs anything. And then she'd find out, and oh, you guys go take this over there. You know, or, especially on like the holidays and shit, you know. Take this to her. It doesn't exist today, but it's like you look out for your neighbors. Or the other thing was from on 38th to Z, it was about 6-7 blocks down the hill. And if we saw like anybody's mother or grandmother carrying packages or something,
The coffee's good.
You have to go help them.
Yeah, yeah.
And they knew.
Yeah, that was proper.
It was like, you know, it was the right thing to do, but I think part of that element also existed with the grocery stores, because back then they would give credit to families. Okay, well, your dad will take care of it on payday. Like, we could go into Ferris Market on 38th or Woody's Liquor on 38th, you know, and get whatever we wanted, not too much. And my dad would take care of it, or my mom would take care of it. So, you know, you did it because we expected to help people, and people helped each other. And back then it was like, because it was mixed. There was white people, there was Japanese, there was Filipinos. It wasn't all Mexicans. But where we lived on Z in that part of Shelltown, they were all people from Baja. Somebody, you know, somebody knew somebody, and they get that land, you know. But if you look at it and scratch the surface, they all had that nexus to Baja California, and then the other neighborhoods are people from New Mexico. It was like
interesting.
It was regional, but that bond that came from the original sisters, and I'm sure that it applies to everybody, but it just, you watch it and it's there, but over time it's not. Kids don't even know their neighbors. I don't know my neighbors anymore. I used to, when I lived in National City, I was like I had the greatest neighbor. He was a contractor, but I was a little close to him. And then as I moved to Bonita and shit, you know, like,
Yeah.
not as much. And then basically now, you know your neighbors by sight, but
Yeah.
we used to
Like my
help.
next door neighbor, I know them by sight. You know, they've been there for many years. They don't really talk to me. They don't really say hi. But what I do know is whenever there is an incident on my side or their side, I can count on them.
Yeah.
They're there for you.
Yeah.
But other than that, they
Yeah.
just keep to themselves.
No, and people do that. It's not, you know. But, and then as you get older, you don't really want them bothering you either.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's like in Bonita, well, I lived in National City, then I moved to Bonita. But Bonita, I had some great neighbors. And then I got divorced and I sold my house to David Valladolid. You know David? And I was telling him, hey man, there's a guy across the street, you know, neighbor, Pepe Salas, he's a good dude. And then there's another guy at the end of the cul-de-sac. He works for Custom, but he's a, you know. So I was telling David, hey, these are the good people. The other ones, don't waste your time.
Okay.
You know.
I'm gonna stop it and start it again.